Your Majesties, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Clingendael Institute. Over the past 40 years, the Clingendael Institute has been a place for analysis, training, debate, discussion, and research about all facets of international affairs. We at the Clingendael Institute are also privileged to be able to collaborate closely with our network of friends and partners across Europe, not in the least to develop ideas to strengthen European security, European resilience, and European economic prosperity. And one of our most esteemed partners, with which we love to collaborate over recent years, has been our most cherished friends at the Elcano Royal Institute. And today marks a very special occasion, obviously, as we welcome Your Majesties here to our institute to celebrate the Spanish-Dutch relationship. Now, Spain and the Netherlands face a host of common challenges as geopolitical headwinds blow across the continent. The war in Ukraine, conflict and instability in the Sahel and the broader Middle East, uncertainty about which direction the United States is going to go, how we relate to China's growing economic and geopolitical power, these are all testing our societies. And coming up with common answers to these common challenges has been at the heart of the strategic dialogue that Clingendael and the Elcano Royal Institute have initiated since 2018. And the ideas that are generated in this dialogue also deserve an audience, a public, if you will. And that is why the presence of Your Majesties here today is so important. Representing our two peoples in the context of this public session today really is a crown on our efforts so far. We also welcome today amongst us a number of key representatives of the private sector, as we acknowledge at the Clingendael Institute that many of the challenges Spain and the Netherlands face cannot be addressed by think tankers discussing amongst themselves, although I wish that were true. We really also need to engage with the public, with the business community, to make Europe resilient, innovative, and competitive in this increasingly new, challenging geopolitical era. And this afternoon, we would like to look back a little at where we have come from in our strategic dialogue and also where we can move towards, so what lies ahead, focusing on how Spain and the Netherlands can deliver for the competitiveness and economic security of Europe. And I'm very pleased to introduce you to Monica C., Director of the Clingendael Institute, Charles Powell, Director of the Elcano Royal Institute, Salvador Rueda, who is the Director General for Integration and Coordination of EU General Affairs at the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and last but not least, Christian Rehberger, the Treasurer General at the Ministry of Finance. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have a short discussion about where we've come from and where we're going to, and then hopefully, if there is time, although I don't know if we do, there'll be a chance to ask questions. Also, I should note that this is an on-the-record conversation. So Charles, without much further ado, can I start with you? Spain and the Netherlands, a Northern European, a Southern European country, have somewhat unexpectedly become rather close partners. Why is this? And what might that herald for the future?
Thank you very much, Rem. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Your Majesties. Before I start, on behalf of our chairman, José Juan Ruiz, and everyone at Elcano, let me just say what a great honor and a pleasure it is to be here, and to thank our friends and colleagues, and Monica in particular, for their wonderful hospitality and their very hard work in putting this event together. So to go straight to your question, Rem, I'd like to remind everyone that we have a wonderful motto in the European Union, and that motto is united in diversity. We could have gone for something more obvious, like l'union fait la force, which is, in fact, no disrespect, the motto of at least half a dozen countries that I can think of: Andorra, Belgium, Bulgaria, Haiti, Georgia, Malaysia. But ours is more sophisticated, it's more difficult, it's more challenging, because our motto actually recognizes something crucial, which is not just the unity that we aspire to, but also the diversity that we all bring to the European table. And I want to stress this because this Spanish-Dutch relationship that we were talking about is in fact an expression of that diversity. And the point I think that's really needs to be made is that diversity is one of the key strengths. We have different social backgrounds, we have different cultural traditions, political traditions, and yet Spain and the Netherlands have been able to work together selectively. It's a paradox, as you were saying. I was pointing out earlier when we were talking amongst ourselves that ideologically the governments of our two countries have very rarely coincided. When we had conservative governments, the Netherlands had socialist governments, and vice versa. So why has this happened? I think the first reason is in this increasingly challenging, difficult international environment, we all realize that we are all actually small countries. We love to quote Paul-Henri Spaak when he said that Europe consists of two types of countries, small countries and countries that haven't yet realized that they're small. And this is true of Spain, it's true of all member states. Secondly, I think that in this increasingly heterogeneous European Union, Franco-German leadership may perhaps be a necessary, but it's certainly an insufficient requirement for progress in the European integration procedure. And Spain and the Netherlands, as the fourth and fifth largest economies in the EU, understand that they have a special responsibility. And finally, of course, dare I mention it, it's Brexit. If there is a bit of a silver lining in the Brexit cloud from a Spanish and a Netherlands and a Dutch perspective, I think that is Spanish-Dutch cooperation. What does it mean for Europe? And why is this collaboration significant? The fact that two countries that have different attitudes towards European integration means that if they can come to a meeting of minds, if they can reach a consensus on some of the most controversial topics that we will be discussing this afternoon, such as fiscal rules or strategic autonomy, this means there is hope for the EU. Together, we can provide a sort of landing ground for other member states and the European Union as a whole to forge a consensus on this common ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. And Monica, turning to you, Elcano, or the Elcano Royal Institute and the Clingendael Institute have played a small part in trying to build that relationship. The two institutes initiated their strategic dialogue in 2018, also with the very generous and important support from both Ministries of Foreign Affairs. What was the rationale behind starting that dialogue, and what role do you think it can continue to play?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, the idea behind a 1.5 dialogue was that meetings among our government officials plus the think tanks could turn these ad hoc coalition partners into more structural allies in Europe, sustainable allies. Scientists and think tankers have the liberty and the privilege of exploring new common ground, whereas at the same time having the government officials on board was really key to producing these authoritative non-papers that have came out of these strategic discussions. And that was really necessary because in 2018, when we started the dialogue, our institutes felt that the geopolitical challenges of today demand a reorientation of the European policies of Spain and the Netherlands, and also an investment in these new allies, because the times when Europe revolved mainly about free movement and we relied heavily on the US for security were really over. Our citizens and our businesses demand more than these freedoms, and they also want protection of our communities and support for the modernization of our economies in times of geopolitical rivalry. And for that kind of Europe, Spain and the Netherlands are logical allies. Let me make 3 examples for that. First, allies for a Europe that promotes a competitive and resilient economy, among others through smart industrial policies. And here are economic characteristics and also political traditions, and that goes beyond the ideology of that specific government, point us both in the direction of open strategic autonomy and de-risking rather than decoupling from global value chains. Secondly, we're also important allies for a Europe that protecting the EU's economic security and our social market economies. That's also what we very much have in common. And a Europe also that protects its communities against large-scale irregular migration while keeping at the same time gates in the fortress Europe, because we have this international promise to protect refugees, and we need legal pathways for selective labor migration because we have aging societies. And the Netherlands and Spain are both pioneers where it comes to this external dimension of migration. And thirdly, we are important also in partnering with third countries, among others, investing in our economic security and sustainable development through the Global Gateway. And we'll come back to that in the second panel today, and really conscientiously partnering with third countries, understanding their concerns based on mutual benefits in the field of development and migration.
Yeah, thank you. And for the uninitiated, Monica mentioned two terms that I want to highlight, which is track 1.5. That suggests there is a track 1 and a track 2 and something in between. Track 1 is generally policymakers amongst themselves. Track 2 is think tankers amongst themselves. And track 1.5 is bringing them together. And that's why it's great that senior policymakers have always been a feature of our strategic dialogue, to make it a 1.5. And one of the deliverables of our dialogue has been something, or at least we like to think, a non-paper. Now, for the uninitiated, a non-paper is actually a paper, but it doesn't have any formal status. It's a think paper, if you will, from policymakers. And some of the ideas in two very critical non-papers, which we'll discuss in a second, emerged from some of the discussions that we've had in the strategic dialogue. One primarily on strategic autonomy, or rather, should I say, open strategic autonomy. But I'm very happy that Salvador and Christian are both here as senior policymakers. And Salvador, as I mentioned, one of the issues that we've talked a lot about is strategic autonomy, open strategic autonomy. And today, you could argue it's more a question of economic security. That term has been taken to discuss economic security for Europe at large. What can the Netherlands and Spain do together to move that economic security file forward, knowing that we've played a bit of a role in putting open strategic autonomy on the European agenda?
Yes, thank you so much, Rem, for this very pertinent question. And please allow me to say how honored I am to be taking part in this conversation here today, organized by Clingendael together with Elcano Royal Institute. This conversation could not be more pertinent because we are now precisely preparing a new strategic agenda for work within the European Union in the next institutional cycle. As we speak, members of the European Council are meeting in Brussels in an informal meeting to discuss competitiveness, precisely. And competitiveness, as you know, is one of the main elements of economic security. And when we work in these matters, we are working as part of a response to an increasingly complex international context with trends that question the rules-based order that we have known for decades. And in finding solutions to this very complex scenario, Spain is convinced that we have to work primarily within the European Union, at European level. And we are also convinced that our cooperation with the Netherlands is probably essential to bring forward effective ideas. This comes from the fact that during the past few years we have had an excellent, a very strong cooperation that is based on two facts. First, that we have a similar approach on issues like openness, like fair competition, like a preference for more Europe. And second, the fact that we have differing views in certain issues, which makes us very complementary. And as Charles said, whenever we find a solution between ourselves, that those solutions can be shared by a large number of member states and probably can become European solutions. And a case in point is the non-paper you were talking about, the common vision on strategic autonomy and an open economy that we presented in the spring of 2021 that had concrete proposals in order to make Europe a global player that is resilient and that's in charge of its own future through open strategic autonomy. That non-paper was very influential, as was the one presented in 2022 on the priorities of the European Union economic and financial affairs. And based on that work, Spain decided to put competitiveness, economic security, resilience as an important priority of its presidency of the European Union Council in the second semester of 2023. We organized several ministerial meetings on the matter. We produced a policy paper called Resilient EU 2023 that received a very important input from the Netherlands, and that was the basis of the Granada Declaration that was adopted in the Informal European Council of Granada on the 6th of October. Based on the contents of that declaration and on the fact that we are nowadays working on the priorities of the European Union for the next institutional cycle, I think the EU could benefit from a continuation of our work together, of this very good Dutch-Spanish cooperation in different areas, and in the field of competitiveness and economic security, we could work to deepen the internal market. We could work to give new impetus to the industrial policy, to develop strategic industries. We could also work to have a real energy single market with more interconnections. We could work to improve our innovation, to improve our human resources, and in the external realm, we could also work to maximize the benefits of our openness and minimize the risks. And in order to maximize the benefits, we believe we need to have an ambitious trade agenda. And in this respect, I would like to say that for Spain, it is essential that we work with Latin America in order to ensure that we have a diversified trade policy, that we have access to critical raw materials, to resilient supply chains. And also, in order to minimize the risks, we have to work in order to expand, where necessary, the tools of the European Union and to apply effectively the ones that we have. Anyway, these are just a few examples of what we can do together, but I am sure that this seminar will serve precisely to identify new areas where Spain and the Netherlands can together lead the way for a more prosperous and more competitive and more resilient Europe.
That's great, and what you're also saying is that we should build more on the strategic autonomy paper that we've produced. Let me turn now to you, Christian. Another an issue that the EU is struggling with, which Salvador also mentioned, is this issue of competitiveness. Now, competitiveness and strategic autonomy go a little bit hand in hand, but one of the issues, knowing that you sit at the Ministry of Finance, that's being talked about a lot in the context of boosting competitiveness, is how does the EU generate sufficient financial firepower, if you will, to spur innovation, to give credence to its ambitions on industrial policy, to strengthen the internal market. Now, today and yesterday, we know that a report was published, the so-called Letta report, which is now being discussed in the Special European Council. But since we have you here now and not in Brussels, can you perhaps give us some indications about how you reflect on the initial reading of the Letta report about strengthening the internal market, also from a financial point of view?
Thank you, Rem, and let me also start by saying what a big honor it is to be here today in this very special meeting about something which is really high on the political agenda, as you just were referring to. An hour ago, I was still talking with my colleagues in Brussels to negotiate the final conclusions on specifically how to deal with the Letta report. And I can say here that what the Dutch vision in that discussion is really based on our joint paper, where both Salvador and Monica were referring to of 2021 on open strategic autonomy. And I think the openness here is important. We are convinced that if we want to promote competitiveness in Europe, if we want to be stronger, more resilient, if we have to deal with more subsidies from, let's say, whether it's China or the US, we have to be stronger ourselves, not directly by giving, let's say, more state aid. Also, I think probably both our countries know that, let's say, if there's more state aid given, it's not us who receive most of the state aid. It's the biggest countries in Europe, so to say, who will probably then receive most. And I think the statistics underline this. So I think here we have a common interest that we should focus ourselves on our strength. And yes, therefore we do need investments. Mario Draghi is going to be the author of another important report later this year, also on the competitiveness of Europe. He let's say says that at least 500 billion euros a year is necessary for the investments in Europe, for the transition, for the energy transition, for digitalization, for defense. So it's a huge amount, and it cannot be done by public investments only. So we need private investments, and that's possible. And that, let's say, relates to my second point, which is the capital market union, which is actually debated as we are discussing here. And well, the capital market union, Mr. Letter, actually, he says, capital market union, what is it? We should rather talk about a savings and investment union. Mm. And that makes it, I think, more clear, because we save a lot here in Europe. But the money we save is hardly invested in Europe. It's invested in the US. And why is it invested in the US? Because the US is more attractive for investors to invest in. Bigger returns, more harmonized markets, single supervision of markets. And I think here's the challenge for us, and that's actually what's on the table today. If we want to, let's say, remain or front runner in technical innovation, in fintech. I mean, I understood it was an important part of the state visit, the Dutch-Spanish collaboration on fintech and on innovation. We do need to attract more private investments. And what is important there, and I think that's really an area where the Spanish and the Dutch government are collaborating and can continue to collaborate, is making sure there is let's say, a clearer European rule book for investments, that there's more central supervision, that there is, let's say, rules about bankruptcy, about tax, corporate tax, which are much more harmonized. I think that's really important if we want to competitiveness stronger in Europe.
Yeah. And let me follow up with one other question, which is, there is this other non-paper, which again is an existing paper, which Spain and the Netherlands produced, which ties in with something that Charles also put on the table, which is the fiscal dimension. And fiscal issues have oftentimes been framed as one where the North views it very differently as the South. Well, here we have two countries, a Northern European country and a Southern European country, that actually came together to produce a non-paper on, amongst others, the Stability and Growth Pact. So a very, rather somewhat technical to some, to me at least, but very important ingredient in building that robust European economic financial house. Could you take us a little bit along in how you see the Netherlands and Spain moving forward on that fiscal element of their bilateral cooperation?
Yes, and I think it's important. We're talking here about the so-called Stability and Growth Pact, which basically are the rules, the budget rules, the fiscal rules in Europe, and how we collaborate together. And if you, let's say, look how they have been functioning over the last decade, I think there is some lessons learned. And I think it's important that it starts so that we have a joint analysis, both Spain and the Netherlands. Because the current system was very rigid. It was has no incentives to do these necessary investments and reforms, as we were just referring to. We had rules, but they were hardly enforced. And it did not really take into account the different situations in the different countries. So it was not country-specific in a way. So what you can do then, so we ask ourselves what to do, how can we influence the agenda, how can we set the agenda? And exactly, well, as you are referring to, Charles, countries which normally seem to have a different position came together and had the courage to say, okay, let's sit together and then influence the agenda. And from our perspective, for us it was very important that rules were better enforced. And we were ready to give in a bit, let's say, on this country specificness. We had some doubts, to be honest, at the beginning. But when we teamed up, we came up with a concrete proposal in this non-paper, and then, let's say, 2 years later, it was the core of the proposal of the European Commission. And last December, under the Spanish presidency, it was endorsed by the Council, and it's now, let's say, part of the rules. And it was not easy. In the Netherlands, there were many political parties that, why are you working with Spain? And we had a lot of questions from Parliament. You should work with Germany. That's a natural ally. Our natural allies, in a way, the Frugals or the Hanseatic League. I mean, they say, well, what's happening? You're leaving us. You're going to work with Spain, and so it's quite some pressure on us. And I understood from my Spanish colleague they more or less had the same pressure from like-minded countries. So it needed some courage, also internally at the Ministry of Finance. People felt it quite difficult to find common ground, to use the same words. But well, if you look to the result, it has been quite effective. And when we look back, I think what was crucial was courage, political courage. It was trust. I mean, I had daily or weekly phone calls with my Spanish colleague, who's now the Minister of Finance, and we really trusted each other. We never surprised each other by putting things on the table, and that was really important. We had a joint analysis in the beginning, so we knew what was wrong. And finally, well, you know the stereotypes about our countries, and I think we were willing to overcome these stereotypes. Because if you just look to the facts, and you look, for instance, to the financial achievements of Spain over the last 10 years, actually it's better than the Dutch achievements. And if you look to reforms and investments, in a way, let's say, the Spanish have become more Dutch, and the Dutch have become more Spanish.
We are on the record, just so.
No, but I mean, you have to look to the facts. Yep. It's quite amazing. And well, and if you are willing to, then you. That's what Europe needs to become more competitive.
2 points stick out to me, which I want to bring back to Charles. Which is, one is the element of trust that you highlighted, the importance of trust in order to do things together. And secondly, which I will wholeheartedly embrace, is if Spain and the Netherlands come together to do things together, the rest of the EU actually takes note, because they are sometimes seen to be strange bedfellows or representing particular stereotypes. But actually, when Spain and the Netherlands do stuff, whether it's strategic autonomy, whether it's on Stability and Growth Pact, like you mentioned, it ultimately does become part of EU common decisions. Given that, Charles, if you gaze in your crystal ball, and I know you have one, what are other areas where you think that we, as the two think tanks, but also in our broader context where we are here today, should be working on?
Thank you, Rem. And thank you, Christian. That's really heartwarming to hear such candid views on the bilateral relationship. Thank you very much. No, I'm serious, because, as you say, trust and breaking down traditional stereotypes and rethinking like-mindedness is actually the name of the game in our contemporary EU. I think this is very important. So first of all, our chairman likes tangibles. So the thing I'm going to propose in our seminar later today is that Clingendael and Elcano study the Letta and Draghi reports very carefully. We've already had a look at the Letta report. The Draghi report is not out yet. So that we can begin to analyze them through a Spanish-Dutch lens and identify those areas where we might continue to work together in the future. I think Letta has done a brilliant job, and I think to some extent he's paved the way for us. But just 4 policy areas, perhaps, and then a final remark about something that hasn't been mentioned yet. First of all, I know this is repetitive, it's a bit of a cliche, but what is our strongest asset in the EU? It's the single market. And this is something that the Netherlands and Spain fully understand and have always understood. So this is a cliche, yes, but the question is, how can we make sure, how can we protect the single market from the growing danger of fragmentation, which I think is a very real danger. And I think Spain and the Netherlands are in a unique position to do that. Secondly, and this has to do with the single market, what kind of industrial policy can we also jointly conceive? Industrial policy is back worldwide in every large country in the world. And of course, to some extent, this is going to create strains because of traditional EU policies. So what can we do together to find ways of implementing a new industrial policy? Both of our populations want reindustrialization, but we have yet to define exactly what kind of reindustrialization, but without challenging or undermining the single market or competitiveness. I think that's a second policy area where we can do a lot. Thirdly, the opinion polls that we conducted at Elcano, and Clingendael has just conducted their own barometer, which is called Between Fear and Hope, by the way, and it's an excellent title. I think it really captures where we are in Europe. And what both your barometers and our barometers detect is that our societies, of course, are aware of the importance of climate change and of fighting climate change. But there is a new dimension to this conversation now, even in Spain. Spain is very pro-green policies, but the cost of the green transition is beginning to become an important part of this conversation, which it wasn't hitherto. It was probably already a part of the Dutch conversation. And this is also happening in Spain. In other words, the idea that the green transition has costs, that it might have losers as well as winners. So we should share, I think, our joint concern about the possible blowback, which is already becoming apparent. And there are specific initiatives. Your Majesties have been involved in the whole question of bringing green hydrogen to the Netherlands from Spain. So that, I think, is already a very important start. Fourthly, our societies are also increasingly aware of external threats. In Spain in particular, we sort of lived in a Panglossian world. There were no tangible threats. Mr. Putin has forced us to wake up and smell the coffee. So I think that cybersecurity, for example, is a policy area where we could do more, and of course, to guarantee that we have a strong defense industrial base. And finally, I want to mention what is often referred to as the Global South. We in Elcano call it the plural South, because we think it's a mistake to lump countries that are actually so different together. You know, Mauritania and Saudi Arabia are supposedly both parts of the Global South, but the GDP per capita is much, much higher in one than in the other. So what I would argue here is that we should do more to leverage Spanish and Dutch shared values and perceptions of the world. We are Europeanist, we are Atlanticist, we are multilateralist, we have multicultural societies, we are essentially fundamentally cosmopolitan. And there's something specific as well. Spain has a presence in Africa and strong ties with Latin America. The Netherlands has a presence in Latin America and strong ties with its former overseas territories. I think this gives us insights and a sensibility towards dealing in our ability to deal with the plural South. We are, by the way, the only two transcontinental monarchies in Europe, so let's put that to work.
There's a lot to chew on there, and I'm dying to follow up with that in the second session as well. But Monica, let me also give you a chance to reflect not just on Charles's list, but also specifically ask you: are there different ideas that you would suggest in how we move that dialogue forward?
Thank you. Apart from these very timely new topics, I think our dialogue could really benefit from including citizens and business from now on. So this could be a turning point in opening our dialogue in that direction, because we need that for resilience in times of geopolitical rivalry and working on economic security. And our public opinion polls and surveys among businesses could work as a really good instrument for that. Because what is necessary, I think, is a structural process of listening and leading in our relationship with societies. First, listening really conscientiously through these surveys to the concerns and the hopes of the public and businesses as regards rising geopolitical tensions. It struck me that in the top three of hope of the Dutch people was the strengthening of the high-tech manufacturing industry in our countries. In this context, it was really very promising to see Your Majesties in our ports pioneering this green hydrogen cooperation for more resilient and sustainable Europe. I think that is exactly that source of pride and hope that people are longing for, and also leading our societies to become more aware that de-risking and investing in a sustainable, resilient, competitive economy will require something from all of us as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, all four of you. Unfortunately, this is where we have to leave our first sort of hors d'oeuvre for the rest of the day, but I think it's fantastic. And Your Majesty, yesterday evening at the state banquet, you mentioned that the Netherlands and Spain are branches of the same European tree, and how true that is. And we are here today in the park. Spring looms, the sun is shining. And may I finish by saying that I hope that this relationship continues to blossom and grow, because as Europe, we are only as strong as the branches of that tree. So thank you very much for your time shared with us. And please join me, everyone, in thanking our four excellent panelists.